Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Mobility Week 2020. Glad to have you all here virtually. Things have been very crazy this year, but thank you again for joining us. We're right at 1 o'clock. I'm going to give it maybe 1 or 2 minutes and let those last few stragglers hop on. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the question box throughout the webinar. We will do questions at the end, but I will be able to see your questions throughout the webinar, and I'll write them down so that we can address them at the end. We'll give it till 1:02, and then we will get started. All right. So again, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Mobility Week 2020, virtually this year. Today, we're going to have a presentation from Wabette Hay and Tiffany Gerke in regards to SunTrail, our shared use non-motorized trail program. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the question box. We will address all questions at the end, but please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. And I will hand it off to Wabette if you want to do a small introduction.
Oh, actually, Tiffany's going to start off first.
Yeah, I mean, just introducing yourself, both of you guys.
Okay. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Wabette Hay with the Florida Department of Transportation, District 4. I am the trail coordinator in our district.
And hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Gerke. I'm the bike and pedestrian coordinator and the trails coordinator in District 6, which is Miami-Dade and Monroe County. And I'll be presenting the SunTrail network on behalf of District 6. But together, Wabette and I will be just discussing the program. I'll be going over some of the legislative features about what makes SunTrail, what made it come about, why it's important, and then Wabette will be talking more about the applications and the typical process for that. I just want to share with everyone one more time, though, that this year's solicitation has been canceled. Does that mean SunTrail is not, does that mean SunTrail doesn't exist? No, that does not mean that. SunTrail continues. It's just the solicitation cycle for this year is no longer happening. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is a nice quote that sort of sums up the program and our partnerships and why partnerships are important. There's no single model for how trails are funded, developed, and managed in Florida. Trails happen through collaborative efforts of many partners. So if you really look, I mean, there's so many different opportunities for funding. We actually have some material to assist our partners with finding some of the possible funding mechanisms that exist, and I'd be happy to share that. If you do need that, just reach out to me and I can share that with you. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so there's some Florida statutes that have helped bring SunTrail to life. So back in 2015, program was established through a Florida statute 339.81. Every year there's typically a $25 million allocation, and that's to be distributed throughout the state. And this money develops a system of non-motorized trails that's geared to bicycle and pedestrians. And that the SunTrail is not just any trail. It's not just, if there's a trail exists, we can look for SunTrail funding. No, that's not the case. It has to be prioritized through the Office of Greenways and Trails, and it needs to be in the Florida Greenways and Trails system as a priority network. And we'll go over that a little bit in detail. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, this right here is the SunTrail map. This is the list of all the networks on the SunTrail. So some of these might just be a plan. They might not be anything. It could be that there's nothing in that location at this time, or it could be that there is a trail in place. It could be unpaved. It could be narrow. It might need improving, and any of the facilities listed on here with regards to the SunTrail network are eligible for funding. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so this is how the Florida Greenways and Trails System Plan is established, and also how those trails are prioritized. So typically, so you can see here, it discusses the opportunity corridors. Now, opportunity corridors, there are quite a few of them. If you go to their website, you can actually see there's a lot of opportunity corridors. So currently, for instance, in District 6, and if anybody here is from Miami-Dade County and in District 6, one of our opportunity corridors, for instance, is the Commodore Trail. It is listed as an opportunity corridor through Florida Greenways and Trails and the Office of Greenways and Trails. However, in order to make that, as many people wish, they want that to be part of the SunTrail network. So in order to make that trail a priority corridor, it needs to be established as one through the Office of Greenways and Trails. And to do that, they have about every 5 years an update to the priority corridors. And you can see that in the blue box there where it says FGTS. And the things that you need to present to the council, the Florida Greenways and Trails Council, is you have to present their stakeholder input, there's a strong interest in that network, and that it fulfills the Florida Greenways and Trails system criteria. And then once it's a priority, now it will be a part of that SunTrail network, which is what FDOT manages. FDOT does not manage what is a priority and what is not a priority. That is done through the Office of Greenways and Trails. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is about the work program. So when something gets funding or is looking to get funding through SunTrail, because it's an FDOT program, it is part of our work program. So for instance, when a typical application comes in for funding, it will come in typically, it would be done in December, and we would receive that application. Now we would review it over the course of a few months locally in the district, and then it would go toward to central office. And then at that point, central office, they would look over all the applications and then prioritize them accordingly. And then in the fall, when we have our public meetings, at that point, those are the ones we've chosen for funding are then announced during those public hearings. However, just note this is almost a year after the application has come in. Now that's now a part of the tentative work program. And then it's submitted, that tentative work program is submitted, and then it's adopted July 1st. So if everything goes smoothly, if everything's fine, then that come July 1st, so not a year after the application, but more like a year and a half after the application, that project would then be adopted into our work program, which then determines that project would be funded in the given year, whatever year was chosen. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so these are the different things that are reviewed during the legislative session. Feel free to look over that, but we can go to the next slide. Okay, and these are just some examples of the adopted work programs in the previous years. We do look to do something 5 years out, so the adopted work program that's currently established right now and that it is adopted is the 2023-2024, and now what we're working on right now, the tentative work program is for 2025-2026. And that will be adopted July 1st. We can go to the next slide. Okay, and you can see how it's been distributed throughout the state, how the funding has been distributed throughout the life of SunTrail. Now you have to understand that, and I think we'll touch on this a little bit more later, is that there are certain trails that are regionally prioritized that are in other districts, so they might actually receive a larger allocation than us based on the priority of the trail. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And again, you can see how the funding has been distributed per county. All right, next slide. Okay, and again, this is what typically is funded through SunTrail. It's typically a 12-foot asphalt paved path. We can go up to 14 feet. However, the minimum is 8 feet. So there might be some constraints where you have to actually narrow it down, and the minimum would be 8 feet. There are situations that you might need to just put a little stretch on as an on-road facility, and that's only allowed where the trail is absolutely not feasible, and it's only allowed for half a mile. However, there are situations, for instance, on the Overseas Heritage Trail in the Keys, where that has had to be an exception. Okay, we can go to the next.
Hi everyone. I'm going to be taking over here. So where do we have all this information? So we've had a couple of books that we've created that give you detailed information. We have a couple of websites. If you go to the shared use path for SunTrail program, if you just Google it, it actually takes you to a website which is within the Department of Transportation website that provides you with a lot of detail as it relates to SunTrail. You know, once you get in there, it'll provide you information about the statute that Tiffany mentioned earlier. How does it govern it? It give you a lot of different information. And if you don't remember my name or Tiffany's name going forward, our contact information is there. We also give you a lot of information about the Florida Green Whales and Trail, different events that's going around the state, the map of the SunTrail network. Tiffany touched base on it a little while ago, but in case you forget, or from time to time I have to go back and look at it because I don't remember every single location. So that's a good place for you to find that. You know, it also talks about the plans and projects that are within the network right now and provide program guidelines. So, you know, we'll provide you as much information as possible, but sometimes, you know, we get a lot of calls and the information is readily available sometimes out there. So if, you know, you can need clarification, you can contact myself or Tiffany or any of the other trail coordinators within the state, but that information is readily available out there on the SunTrail network website. It also talks about, you know, different resources that is available out there. So once you get off of this call or this presentation, and if you're interested, you can take a quick look out there, and there's tons of information out there for you to go look at. And as I said, if you have any questions or need any clarification on anything, you can contact myself or Tiffany or any of the other trail coordinator within the state. Next slide. So Tiffany mentioned earlier that we have $25 million per year for the trail project. Now, she did touch base a little bit on this, and I'm going to go a little bit more into details about this, where how the funding is split. So, you know, most people believe that individual trails get the entire $25 million, which is not the case. How it's divided is that we usually have a third for individual trails, and then in 2015 the legislation put in the coast to coast regional trail that gets a third of the funding, and then St. John's River also get a third of the funding. So usually when you put in an application, you would be falling into play into the individual trail where you send in your request during the solicitation period, as Tiffany mentioned earlier. that has been canceled for this year, but we are still moving forward with the existing application that we received previously in the previous years. So don't fret, we're still moving forward with the funding, but understand that we only have a portion of that $25 million, and it has to go over the entire Florida. So all 7 counties, 7 districts has to get a portion. Now, trails are prioritized based on the different levels that they are in. For example, if a trail is already in design and you're requesting money for construction, guess what? Chances are you're going to get that money over somebody that's just coming in for, say, a design funding, just because of how we would like it to happen, in the sense that we want to make sure that once the trail is in the system already, that we provide the funding necessary for us to go through the process for it to go to completion. Next slide. So, I get this question all the time. How do we prioritize? How do we know which project we need is going to get funding? And the answer to that question is that we really don't know. We go through a process, and this is just a portion of this process, in the sense that, the locals identify the trails that they would like to put in for an application, and it needs to make sure that it's within the vision of the vision and plans and policies of that community. It needs to be consistent with the public transportation plan. And then you also have to make sure that your MPO is a priority of your MPO. That is very, very important. If it's not within the MPO prioritization, then we will not be able to even submit that application for review to central office, because that's an important aspect of it. And that, you prioritize with your local government and within that area also. That's also an important point. So once we've made that determination, we usually do a ranking and submit it to central office. And we usually go through a few phases within District 4, in the sense that we make sure we have a team that reviews the project, and we try to be as nonpartisan as possible when it comes on to the trails, because we want to make sure that all the trails that need to get funded within our district gets funded. But we need to look at a few different things before. We need to look at the actual design. So we have somebody from the design, we have somebody from traffic to make sure that their safety is a paramount. And then we also have somebody for environment and for road program. Next slide. I know there's a lot of information on here, and I'm not going to read it word for word, but what you need to realize with this is that it needs to be a paved multi-use trail within the SunTrail network. And Tiffany mentioned earlier, and she showed the map of what the network looks like. Now take into consideration, it's not necessarily a mile away from the network. Can you still put the application in? It depends. It could be in a case, we usually look at these on a case-by-case basis, in the sense that if it's just a little tweak, sometimes it can happen, sometimes it can't, depending on where the location of where you put it in the trail request for. But if it's like a mile away or something like that, we will look at that and take that into consideration, but it must be on the SunTrail network. And as I mentioned earlier, it needs to be prioritized by your MPO and by your local government. Now, there is some documentation that needs to be filled out. If this trail is a non-DOT government entity trail, it needs to, the agency will have to submit or sign a documentation that they will be responsible for the trail. Now, we will build the trail, DOT will build the trail and give you the money to build the trail, but we will not maintain the trail. So that is an important aspect that you need to always remember and also consider. and it needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan and transportation plan and the long rail management plan. And those things are very important. We will not even take a look at the application if we don't have that information in place. Next slide. I touched base on this a little bit earlier. This is the Coast to Coast Regional Trail, which is from one part of the state all the way to the other part of the state, and it falls into multiple jurisdictions. And these are the areas that we are that are currently funded and that is being constructed on the trail. Either some of them are in the finishing mode or has not started. But these are the projects that are currently on that particular regional network. Next slide. Okay, so this is the other regional trail, which is the St. John River to the Sea Loop regional trail. And the same thing with this one. It's basically a loop, and it's on the SunTrail network. And as I mentioned earlier, it is in various stages of completion right now. And these two trails, regional trail system gets a third of the money, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide. Now, this is another one of those slides that has a lot of information. But basically, it's just saying that how do we know how to design the trail? Back in in 2015, way before all the trail systems started coming into play, there was some limited information on how to design a trail, how to construct a trail, and a lot of that. But since then, we have actually included a chapter in the FDM, the Florida Design Manual, with instruction on how to design and construct a trail. We also have a chapter in the Florida Green Book, which also deals with that same aspect also. Now, we also had another location that we have information, which is the Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Device, which, even though a lot of the trails are in parks, you have some trails that actually have to go across streets. So make sure that we have the necessary safety procedures in place, or safety lights in place, to make sure that, a family could not be, going from one trail to the next, crossing a major roadway. And if we don't have the facility, somebody dashing across the street and get hit. So we have to make sure that we have those standards in place to make sure that, when we're designing a trail, that we put all the safety initiatives in there. Next slide, please. Now, we talked a lot about the procedures, and we gave you some information on where to find more details about the trail process, the rules and the regulations, the statutes. But we need to talk about this, which is a very important part of the SunTrail network, the things that the SunTrail funding will not cover. For example, bench that are on the trail network, we will not cover it. Well, the funding for SunTrail will not cover it. Bicycle racks, even though that is needed, we still will not cover it, because we are more in line to the feasibility study, the construction and design for these trails. If, for example, you need a building or a restroom or something like that along the trail, SunTrail funding cannot cover that. We can't cover landscaping. Now, if there is landscaping existing on a project, we're not telling you to take it out, but we cannot provide funding to cover additional landscaping in the area. We will not cover littering, garbage cans, stuff like that, doggy dispense bag, parking area, playground, promotional items, or anything, water fountain. And understand all of these are important aspects of the trail, because it enhances the trail. Because if you're using the trail, you know, if you need to stop and go to the restroom, that's a very important aspect. If you need to ride to the trail, park your bike, you want to have a bicycle rack. But unfortunately, SunTrail does not cover all of that. So what we have done in a lot of instances, and the individuals that are very savvy when it comes onto the trail, we do explain that to a new person, because those people already know what is covered by SunTrail and what isn't. So it's always important for us to have a conversation with you if you're interested in doing a trail within our area, to give us a call or take a look at the resources that I mentioned earlier, so you can familiarize with the things that we will cover and we will not. And as I said, a lot of these are very important aspects. And what we have done is work with local governments, the city or the NPOs to cover some of these costs, because we just can't do it. Next slide. So I'm going to touch base a little bit more on a selective criteria. I did touch base on it a little bit in previously. As I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we have I have somebody from my design team, my traffic ops team, work program, and environmental. This is the reason why we do that. We want to make sure, say that, you know, for example, in the first bullet, to, you know, project enhance the safety of bicycle and pedestrian. We had a project one time, and it was I thought it was a great project, but when we had our meeting with the traffic ops folks, they found it as an unsafe situation, so we did not have the capability to fund that project. We're still looking at different avenues to fund that project, but for now it's not being funded. So it also needs to be recognized as having a regional, or state, and national importance. You know, especially now with COVID, you know, everybody's getting out there trying to get as much exercise as possible. And if you're still working from home, you want to go take a walk after a long day of working, or go riding with your family. We look at those things also. Another great point, additional financial contribution. Now, it's not necessary to have a contribution towards the project, but it does way better, because if you have a skin in the game, chances are the project is going to go forward. Now, as I mentioned earlier, not because, you know, when I go and talk to all of my team members, we still have to make sure that safety is paramount. As I mentioned, I had that same project that I mentioned earlier. They actually was contributing money towards the project, but unfortunately, because of the safety concern, we could not make that project go forward. The project needs to be construction ready also, and continue. And I mentioned earlier this also, that, you know, different phase of the project will be funded over other phases, just because we want to make sure we complete the network. Project with high documentation, public support. We know at DOT that we have to make sure that the public is involved in every aspect of any project development, because projects will be killed or be made based on public perception, public involvement. So this is actually a very important part of the criteria, just to, you know, drive this home a little bit more. The public, if you can have a public meeting prior to submitting your application, even though it's not necessary, it would be a good thing for us, because, you know, we don't want to start going through the process in the middle of design, and then, you know, we have an uproar that nobody wants the trail, and then we just spend all of this money on a feasibility study. We've also spent money on, you know, hiring a consultant, and they've gone through multiple different scenarios before they get to this point, and we've just wasted all this money just because, you know, we didn't get the support, or will not get the support from the public. Project enhancement. For example, Tiffany mentioned, we have a couple of trails that is currently existing, but it might have cracks, along the way. So, you know, if in situations like that, you do qualify because we can, you know, maybe take out certain aspect of the trail and replace it along the way. And also a facility that's connecting two existing trails. A good example is that we currently in District 4 have two trails, the Savannah State Park, which is actually in the design phase right now, and the Indian Hill, which is also in the construction phase. Actually, some portion of that trail has been completed already. We are putting a bridge across the railway just to connect those two trails. So by connecting those two trails, we're actually filling that existing gap along the network system. And any projects that, you know, has any cost saving elements to it, we will always look at those also. Next slide. So I mentioned earlier, it's the Savannah State Park. That is in the design phase currently. If all goes well, we should be moving towards the construction phase early by summer of next year. The Indian Hills, we just got a bid from a contractor to actually build that trail. The FEC overpass, it's not in that phase yet, but it's funded just because we are trying to do the connection. And then we have the historic downtown in Fort Pierce and the Highwayman. Those two are in the design phase, and those two last ones are in the feasibility phase. Next slide, please. These are the projects that are in District 6. I know the underline is currently in the design, and the rest of those projects are in different phases from design to construction to feasibility. If you have any questions about those areas, you can contact Tiffany for more details. Next. So, in case you forgot who I am, my information is right here with my pay, and also for Tiffany. Tiffany is in District 6. As I mentioned earlier, you can always go to the shared use SunTrail program, and our contact information will be on there also. Next. Do you have any questions at this point in time for Tiffany or myself?
So thank you so much, Babette and Tiffany. I'll go through some of the questions we had in the pre-registration first, and then we'll go through the questions that people have been submitting during the presentation. Again, feel free to submit your questions at this time with the question pane. We'll get through as many as we possibly can. The first question we have is, when is the SunTrail network planned to be completed?
I can answer. To be honest, nobody knows.
Well, and SunTrail, yeah, as I had mentioned before, every 5 years, there's an opportunity for the SunTrail to get expanded upon through the Office of Greenways and Trails. So there's another hearing in 2023 that will be bringing some potentially new priority trails to be added to the SunTrail network. So I think this is, I mean, our hope, of course, is to finish everything on the current SunTrail, and then eventually, what will eventually happen is that hopefully we'll just get, you know, more and more and more trails added. I mean, the goal of FDOT, of course, is to enhance mobility for all modes. And this is an excellent outlet to do that for pedestrians and cyclists. This is a very safe mode to do that. And I think this will be a continued effort. I don't think there's an end date. Sorry, Babette, I'm sure you might have.
No, I was going to say the same thing, because there's no end date for SunTrail as we know it right now. Just because, you know, we have a lot of work to be done. And even though we have, since the start of the project, we have actually either filled some gaps or about to fill some gaps, but we have a long time left before we get to that point where we even started talking about the end of this program.
Wonderful. I mean, it's I know most people always assume like, oh, here's a certain project, it has to have an end date, but it's nice to know that there is no end date per se. We're constantly growing and expanding and reaching out to more communities and more, including more people. Our next question is, I know you touched on this a little bit, Wabette, but let's see if, how are the SunTrail applications prioritized? Maybe the top one or two things we look for in the applications.
The top, now we usually rank our projects based off of first, second, and third of the ones that we think are going to go through based on those criteria that I mentioned earlier. Safety is a big point. Also, to make sure that it's connecting existing network. Say, for example, you have a gap along the way. If you are providing that reduction in gap, of course, then that's going to be one of our priority, because the deal is that we want to make sure that we are completing the entire network. So those are some of the things that we look at. If it's a trail that is already, out there, that's not paved for that matter, that we would like to pave, because as I mentioned earlier, it has to be paved and it needs to be between 8 to 14 foot. Now there is variation with the 8 foot, but we try not to go that way. But just in case we have environmental impacts to, for example, a wetland, we will grant the 8 foot variance, but between 10 to 12 foot trail. So if in case that we have a location that has people are actually using it, but it's not paved, then that's a good thing. We can go that way.
I also think we really should point out that being a priority with the MPOs, which is in Miami-Dade County, it's a TPO, and the public and municipalities being a priority, especially if it's listed in multiple plans, that's a priority, then it's going to be more of a priority for us. So if we're seeing that it's a priority for the city, for the county, for the TPO, then of course, it's going to then reflect in our priority list as well. However, there are so many different factors that go into place. I would hate to say, oh, it's only those ones, that's it. There's so many things, like Wabette had said, safety, but also just cost effectiveness. We have a limited amount of resources, and we have to budget wisely, and that's kind of reflected in the applications. So there's multiple things that go into play, though.
Yeah, perfect. It's right. And just to jump on that, what Tiffany mentioned, if it's a project that has, a $25 million project, not to submit your application, because it could be split up in phases. So you might not get funding for the entire 25 million in 1 year, because to be honest, we don't even have that kind of money, because as we mentioned earlier, we only have a third of it for all the rest of the trails. Now, but we can split it up in different segments, so we can maybe take a mile or 2 miles and pay for that portion of it. We can go forward and do the same thing for another portion. So just don't take that as a grain of salt. There's a lot of variation. That's why we say, contact myself or Tiffany, ask questions, because you never know. There's a lot of possibility.
And there's no matching required. There isn't. But I think Wabette touched on this earlier. If we're showing that you have skin in the game, if we're showing that it's, again, a priority and it's reflected in the funding allocations, then of course that's going to be reflected in how we prioritize as well. But that's not, that's again, not the be all end all. But if we're showing that this is, gathering, it's getting money from multiple different, outlets, that's going to put it up on the list a little bit.
Perfect. Our next question is, what are the roles of the districts in the SunTrail program?
You want to take that, Tiffany?
You say rules of the districts?
Roles
of the districts in the SunTrail program. Okay, so when you say the districts, I'm guessing you mean Wabette and myself in District 4 and District 6. So what we do is we kind of oversee it on our local scale. So like I had said before, in the application cycle, it all kind of filters through us and then goes to central office for further review and for prioritization. So in the process, it kind of trickles down the opposite way too. In the application cycle, it comes from central office, which then cycles through our mouths and comes to you and the public. So for instance, when we were made aware that this year's solicitation would be canceled, that wasn't us dictating it here at the district. That was much higher up, and then it came through our mouths to you all and to our public agencies. And the same goes for when we have active solicitation cycles, which I'm sure will happen in the near future. But that's the same process. We get told there's a solicitation, and we filter the information. We direct the information to the appropriate parties. And the same thing with any updates to the guidance or the materials or even the application itself. We recently just switched to the GAP system, which is our online application system. And when we made that change, we were informed, we were guided on how to work our way through that system, and then we relayed the information to the public. So we're kind of like the liaisons. And the same goes, but when we do receive an application, we prioritize them first here at the district. That does not mean that's the way we prioritize within the district is how it's ultimately determined when it goes higher. That's just our recommendations based on our knowledge, and then we of course give summaries of why we chose that versus why we didn't, why we prioritize this versus this. So we give summaries so that those higher up, when they're looking through all of the state applications, they have that local knowledge.
And to add to Tiffany, she mentioned that we act as a liaison between the agencies or the people that are submitting the application in central office. And that is very, very important, because even though once we get the application and we do look at it and filter it out and submit it to central office, now when it's being funded, it comes back through us, so we can actually get these project program within our work program to make sure those funding is available. Depending on who's doing the project, if it's a DOT project or a city project or whoever is doing the project, you still need that money. And if there's nobody in the district to make sure that we are coordinating with our work program and making sure if we need to do a contract to provide that funding, that's what we kind of here for. So for example, we had a project which is in, I'm going to mention the Savannah State Park. Now, we actually had to get a contract consultant. We had to go to the process. We had multiple issues along the way, in the sense that we had a lot of environmental impacts that we didn't consider when we were actually programming the fund. I had to go back to central office, request additional funding, which we had to provide that explanation as to the reason why we need those additional funding. So we act as a liaison between central office and whoever is doing the project, the city, county, MPOs, whoever is managing the project. That's currently our job, and a lot of other things too, because we, answer whatever questions you might have. If you look at the guidance and the guidance is not 100% clear, and you just want to verify something, you can reach out to us and ask us the question, and we'll be willing and able to answer it for you.
Thank you for that. I know this number, this 25 million, has been thrown around a few times throughout the presentation. One of our attendees would like to know where that 25 million comes from.
So that 25 million comes from, of course, Tiffany mentioned it earlier, the legislation put it into place in 2015, and also it comes from gas tax. So a portion of, not gas tax, from registration tax, like whenever you go and register your car, a portion of that money goes to the SunTrail project or program. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where that 25 million comes. And it's not just from District 4, it's from all around the entire state. The portion of that money comes from. Go ahead, Tiffany. Sorry.
Yeah, if you look, a lot of times we'll have it coded. So if anybody's looking at one of our documents, we might have it coded as TLWR funds, and we call it like the wheels on the road. And yeah, that's based on registration. And yeah, select 25 million goes toward the trails per year.
Good to know. Someone wants to know, how can they verify if an existing or planned trail is within the SunTrail network already?
The map that we talked about. If you pull up the map, and as I said, if you go to the SunTrail Shared Use Path, SunTrail Trail Program, you will get to the website and you can click on that maps. There's a map on there, just click on it and you can zoom into the area. It's basically almost like a GIS format. And it tells you, where the lines are. So that's a good way to find it. Or you can just call one of us and we can walk you through the process if you don't remember, or we can look it up with you.
Okay, and I think one of our last questions is, how is a multi-use trail different from a sidewalk?
I'll take that, Tiffany. You can jump in afterwards. So a sidewalk is technically only for pedestrian. Even though people ride on the sidewalk, it's by law, they're not supposed to. A multi-use trail is for a non-motorized vehicle in the sense that, you can be a pedestrian, you can ride your bike on there, you can even do your scooter on there. So that's where the difference is, that a sidewalk, and the width dimension is also different, because a regular sidewalk could be 8 feet, whereas a SunTrail project has to be 10 to 12 feet, depending on the location and the variance that we will provide.
Well, actually, sorry, but actually, in the state of Florida, unless there's a sign up that says that cyclists cannot be on the sidewalk, which some do, there are some municipalities that have that. Otherwise, a bicycle can be on the sidewalk, and it just depends on your comfort level. But it's also about what is that facility built for? So if you notice, a lot of times with the sidewalk, it's going to have like sharp corners. It's going to be a certain width between, typically it could be as 4 foot, but could be up to 6 feet. That's typically the range in sidewalk widths. And also a trail is typically asphalt. If you've ever ridden, for these are people that like ride on the sidewalks, you can feel that bump every time you hit that seam in the sidewalk. When you're on a smooth asphalt path, a typical design for a shared use path, you don't have that. It's smooth sailing. It's kind of like a mini road that's made for tires. And it also, again, the trails will have smooth transitions instead of sharp corners. Again, built for a vehicle, a faster moving, when I say vehicle, I mean a bicycle, that's a faster moving than a person that's just walking. So that's, but typically the width is what determines the difference between the shared use path and the sidewalk. But I would say, though, I would go another, asphalt versus concrete.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Right now, we don't have anybody else putting in any questions. Again, attendees, please feel free to submit any questions. But I want to thank you, Tiffany and Babette, for your time today. I learned a lot about the SunTrail, and I'm sure if anybody has any questions, feel free to email myself or email Babette and Tiffany directly. I do want to remind everybody to check out our virtual Mobility Week room. We have at mobilityweekfl.com. It is a virtual room where you can see some of the projects that all of the districts have put together and are showcasing in this room. It's all completely online. And then we also have our Love to Ride Florida Challenge. It's going on, it's beginning this week, but it's going on until the end of the month. lovetoride.net/Florida. I think there's quite a few prizes. I know you can win one of 3 bikes. There's an opportunity to have a bike shop work on your bike. There's quite a few different prizes out there. So I would definitely recommend hopping on. But again, please check out the rest of our webinars as far as Mobility Week goes. And you can check those out also at Mobility Week FL. And here is the contact information for Tiffany and Wabette for any follow-up questions, or again, feel free to email myself as well. But again, thank you so much for your time, Tiffany and Wabette, and have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Tiffany.
Thanks, Wabette. Have a good one.
You too.